In this video, I will explain how to deliver EMDR therapy through an interpreter and give you some points that you need to consider when doing so. Please join me. Hello, I'm Dr Michael Paterson, clinical psychologist and EMDR Europe accredited senior trainer. I'm going to explain to you how to deliver EMDR therapy through an interpreter and consider certain things which I would use whenever I'm delivering it that way. When we bring a third person into the room, it's clear that the dynamic can change. It is important, therefore, to keep the interpreter out of the client's line of sight. Now, picture me sitting here, if you would. If the interpreter is sitting beside me as a client, I would have the interpreter out to the side. That way they're level with my shoulder and I'm not seeing them directly in my field of vision, even in my peripheral vision. When I'm speaking to the client then, I will be directing my questions directly to them and they will answer directly to me. So the interpreter is a bit like an echo. They say what they need to say, the interpreter reports that to me. Another thing to consider when working with an interpreter is that we want the interpreter to translate exactly what it is that we say. If it turns out that English as the language we're using does not relate directly to a particular word or phrase in the language of our client, then we need our interpreter to give the nearest translation to that. We will need to brief our interpreter in advance of what we want them to do. And whenever the interpreter is speaking to the client, as I say, I'm wanting them to say to the client exactly what it is I say. Not paraphrase in any way, but use the words that I use. Also, when the client is replying, using the direct English translation of what they have said to me. I will give you an example of what I mean. I was working with a client one time who had been trafficked to Northern Ireland from West Africa. English was not her first language. In fact, she only had a few words of English. But she had much more French than she did English, but that was her second language. The interpreter who was sent along was a teacher from a local grammar school who taught French. Now, I had done schoolboy French up until age 16, which was a long time ago, but still I remembered quite a bit. But I wasn't fluent, and certainly I could not have conversed in French to this particular client. I had asked a particular question and the interpreter then answered, but I realized from the answer that she gave, it was not the answer to the question that I asked. So I then reminded the interpreter that I needed a direct translation of what the client had said. Another thing to consider when we're working with an interpreter is the dynamic that may be there. Maybe a gender dynamic. Particularly if we are working with a culture where, let's say we have a male client who may see males in their culture as being of superior status to a female. If we have a female interpreter, that may not work particularly well in those circumstances. Another thing to consider is if we are working with somebody as a client from a particular religious background. There may be particular sects in that religious background that are at odds with each other. So for example, a client who has come from an Islamic background, Sunni versus Shia, it might be okay, but it's certainly something to consider. Could it trigger something for one or other? Another thing to keep in mind, of course, is the interpreter you're working with may well have had similar experiences to the client you have in the room with you. What happens then if the interpreter, hearing about the client's experience, then has their own past unresolved trauma triggered? What do you do then? It's not a case of go with that and do this with both clients in the room. No, you'll have to close things down. It's going to interrupt the flow of your treatment plan. The takeaway message from this would be, in response to the question, can you use EMDR therapy through an interpreter? The answer is yes, but taking into consideration the caveats which I've just told you about. So I wish you well with that. Please do make a difference in people's lives, because that's what I'm all about. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, please do. It's free to do so down below. And also, if you request being notified when I post a new video, then YouTube will let you know when that is posted too. I want you to be the best you can possibly be in delivering EMDR therapy.